So, yes, I got the microphone. Welcome back. I'm very glad that you have chosen this session instead of other exciting topics in parallel. I appreciate, really. So this is a panel discussion on the Network and Information Security Directive implementation. And we have excellent speakers here. My name is Baiba Kashkina, still, if haven't anyone been at the first session. I'm the chair of, I'm the general manager of CERT.LV, and I will chair this session. I'm by no means NIS expert, but I will try to get good thoughts out of our esteemed speakers. So please introduce yourselves.
Thank you. My name is Martijn de Hamer. I work for the Dutch National Cybersecurity Center. I'm deputy head of the CERT part of the organization, and as such very much involved in the implementation of the NIS directive, and have been working on implementing it for the last couple of years now.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Elsa Neeme, and from Estonian Information System Authority, and working there as a legal expert. And approximately 1 year from now, I've been very involved with NIS directive transposition in Estonia.
Hello, my name is Sanita Žagota, and I'm from the Ministry of Defense of Latvia. I work in the National Cybersecurity Policy Coordination section, and the ministry and section is involved on implementation of an NIS directive, so we work directly on that.
Hi, my name is Edgars Tauriņš. I'm from CERT.LV as well, and I'm pretty much one most involved in NIS implementation from our team, and we will be working closely together with Ministry of Defense in trying to prepare the steps we need to implement the NIS directive. So,
thank you. So, before we start, let me give a very short introduction on the NIS directive so that we all are on the same page, what it is, who are the stakeholders, what it is all about. So, the Directive on Security of Network and Information Systems. It is the first EU-wide legislation in cybersecurity. It was adopted last summer, and the first deadline, which is already looming upon us, is the transposition of this directive into the national legislation. The deadline is May next year. It may seem far away, but it isn't, I can assure you. Those of you who are part of the legislative process, you know how long it takes. And after it is transposed, we will still have some time until November next year to identify the operators. I know that it's already in process as well, so maybe that's not so looming deadline. Who are the stakeholders of this directive? Basically, all the EU member states, and they have to participate in a couple of groups established by this directive. We have a cooperation group which consists of representatives of all member states, the Commission, and the NIS. And that group has a role of strategic guidance of how this directive is implemented and to examine reports of the players afterwards. Also, information and best practice exchange is part of the collaboration group task. Then we have a CERT network. And that's the place where CERTs from all member states have to sit around one table. They are also joined by CERT-EU, which is the CERT of European institutions, and the Commission and the NIS. And that's the forum where CERTs are expected to exchange operational information, and they are supposed to help each other in cross-border incidents. Of course, those are just the highlights. To whom this directive will apply? We have operators of essential services, and they are, the sectors of essential services are specified in the directive. It's energy, transport, banking, financial market infrastructures, health sector, drinking water supply, and digital infrastructures. Some of these infrastructures we see naturally as critical infrastructure already. Some are newcomers, and that is one of the challenges we'll have to look at. And then we have another group of stakeholders, digital service providers. And those are online marketplaces, online search engines, and cloud computing services. And those are stakeholders that we normally haven't looked at as a part of critical infrastructure. Both digital service providers and operators of essential services will have to address the risks and impact of risks, and also notify of incidents that have a significant impact. But we'll discuss all that in more detail. At the national level, every country is supposed to have a CERT or many CERTs, but there has to be a single point of contact, so we have to know it should be easy to contact any country in case of an incident, and there should be a competent authority who is overseeing in case there are many CERTs or regulators in this regard. The scope. The scope, of course, includes not only the stakeholders, but also the national strategy. It says that every country has to have a national strategy in information security. It establishes already mentioned groups. And another important point is security and notification requirements. So what incidents have to be reported. Operators of essential services, I already mentioned the areas. What is important that the impact of incident for the operators of essential services, and that's again defined in the directive, are number of users, duration of incident, and geographical spread. And for digital service providers, it's not only those three things, but also extent of disruption of service and extent of impact on economic and social activities. So these providers will have to report us about incidents, and we have to think of the thresholds when they have to do it. Incident reporting is probably one of most interesting topics for us as a CERT. We'll discuss it. So this is very brief overview. I hope it reminded you a little bit of the stakeholders and what the directive is about. So it's to set the level, more or less the same in all member states, to have single point of contact where to report issues, to identify the operators who have to report those issues, both of essential services and digital providers, and of course to establish cooperation by cooperation group, by CERT network, by technical means as well. And with that I stop. I will ask all the speakers for very short introduction on what's going on in their countries and institutions, and after that we'll start discussing more interesting bits, I hope. So, Martijn, welcome.
Good morning. First, I'm not a legal expert. I work with a CERT, so I do incident response. As Barbara said, we do incidents. I've got a couple of slides. I've got 3 slides that are fully loaded, and that's why I won't be mentioning all the points on them. Let me see. There we go. First of all, I work with the NCC and with the National CERT, which is recognized in the NIS directive. We are the single point of contact, as in the NIS directive, and our approach has been quite proactive. In 2011, we've had this national crisis, which was the DigiNotar, which is a PKI provider in Holland, was compromised and could no longer be trusted. And this turned into our first and, up till now, only national cybersecurity crisis. The minister at the time said, what we're going to do is we're going to have a law making sure that this will never happen again. So we're going to implement mandatory incident reporting, which nicely aligns with the NIS directive. So what we've done is proactively drafted a law, make sure it aligns with the NIS directive, and from previous Sunday we've got our own law. There's a Dutch Act on data processing and cybersecurity notification, which makes sure that our basis is there. So we're allowed to process personal information, we're allowed to work for the Dutch critical infrastructure and for the central government. and it makes sure that we are not allowed to divulge any information to third parties. So confidentiality, as mentioned in the directive as well, has been taken care of. And also mandatory incident reporting has been taken care of in there as well. As Baiba said, it's very difficult to set the thresholds for when do you need to report. So we're currently in contact with our constituency to determine those. We've got a set of thresholds at the moment for this act, and we'll need to redo the complete exercise basically for the NIS directive. For one, it's been 4 years since we've determined the thresholds, or we didn't do them, the sectors did. But 4 years in cybersecurity is about 100 years in real life, so that's why we need to redo them again. But this has been our approach. We've been going out into the sectors, we've been talking to the public and private partners basically that we do business with, and we ask them what do they think should be reported. So the public-private approach is really the way for us to go about it, the only way we've been able to make stuff work in Holland. Now, we've been one big point on this is constituents. Our approach with constituents is that we've been working with ISACs. So for every sector that is stated as critical, we've formed an ISAC. But within the ISACs, there are both critical infrastructure parties and non-critical infrastructure parties. So we need to separate those. So we've been doing some soul searching, revising our own internal procedures to make sure that we only are able to share personal information with those parties that we're allowed to share personal information with. And we've been communicating with others saying, up till now, we've been sharing information with you, and that's going to stop because we've got this legal basis now. We're no longer allowed to share with you. So that's been the process. We've been reaching out to our constituency very much, been in touch with them to explain to them why things are going to change. And we've been basically explaining the NIS directive and our own act, which nicely aligns to our constituents. Now, some of the difficulties or challenges that we've noticed is that, for one, we recognize vital infrastructure. Sorry, we recognize vital infrastructure in Holland, and the NIS directive speaks about essential infrastructure or providers of essential services. Now, in Holland, we've been able to merge those two to make sure that we speak in one language and not speak of two different types of organizations. Then there's the sectors. We're part of the anti-terrorism unit, basically, and they recognize a different set of sectors or different set of services as being vital as opposed to the NIS directive. So those have been the challenges that we need to align those because we cannot work with two sets of rules, basically. Another thing that's been, I think it's been a challenge and also a success, is that in our law, it's stated that we're only allowed to share information or personal information with our constituency, which is central government and critical infrastructure. But we also want to share with trusted CERTs. Now, obviously, in the NIS directive, it states that we're allowed to share with the 28 and soon to be 27 member states. We'd like to share wider than that because incidents do not have geographical borders, let alone European borders. In our act, and that's going to be transposed into the NIS law that we're going to have from the 10th of May next year, we've taken up a list of CERTs that were trusted by our minister, with our input, obviously, and that's a list that can very easily be expanded. So, for example, any organization that is in Trusted Introducer, for example, or one of our other trusted networks, and we really need to be able to share with those teams, we can tell our minister, please update the list of CERTs that we're allowed to share information with, and then we can, obviously, with all the checks for the GDPR compliance, etc., but then we're allowed at least to share personal information with those trusted CSERTs. So those were a few of our challenges and a few of the points from our approach. It's been, well, as Barbara said, we've got until May 2018, and that sounds like a lot of time, but it really isn't. It's a lot of discussions, a lot of reaching out to our constituency, and that's, I think, where the power of being a CSERT lies.
Thank you. Thank you. Elsa, I would like to ask you and tell us a little bit what are things in Estonia.
So, looking briefly back to this transposing process in Estonia, then it started in 2016 when Estonian Information System Authority carried out a legal analysis in collaboration with a law firm in order to assess the current legislation regulating cybersecurity in Estonia. And one of the key findings in this analysis was that with regard to the transposition of NIS international law, that our law in force doesn't fully meet the NIS requirements and purposes, and therefore it was recommended to consider transposing the directive by drafting a new act. Then in December 2016, the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communication established a working group in order to involve all interesting stakeholders in this transposition process. And as of December, we all started drawing up a legislative intent as well, which outlined the gaps of the current regulation and also described the necessary changes. This legislative intent was submitted by Ministry for the approval to other ministries, and from April we started to draw up a Cybersecurity Draft Act, which was submitted to a public consultation to other ministries just last week. Currently the planned consultation period is up to 2 months maximum, and this draft act will be submitted to the Parliament hopefully in January. So now I can only outline a vision of this draft act because it's not closed yet. So what have we done? We have listed in this act vital and essential services, but this list based on Emergency Act, we have 14 vital services and 8 essential services in whole currently. Approximately there are 600 service providers. And besides essential and vital services, the draft covers government authorities and local government authorities. Second, the draft sets out, how to say, generally recognized principle for all stakeholders who are involved in ensuring cybersecurity. For instance, principle of reduction of possible damages in case of cyber incident. Then principle of integral protection, which means, in other words, that possessor identifies potential threats to the system and related information assets and applies appropriate organizational and technical measures to protect the system. So third, this draft sets out competence and powers for Estonian Information System Authority. From the NIS directive perspective, Estonian Information System Authority carries out CERT tasks. At the same time, we are supervisory authority and single point of contact as well. So basically, the requirements are quite simple and recognized already in our current regulation as well. Service providers are obliged to carry out risk assessment, required to ensure the constant application of security measures in regard to the information systems used for provision of vital services. And also service providers must set up regular automated monitoring process in order to ensure the proper functioning and operation of active network components. Okay.
Let's leave some details for discussion.
Okay. And of course, Draft Act requires incident reporting. Also, two new legislative points I would bring out now, which would probably help CERT in incident handling, is first that Internet service providers are required to provide CERT necessary information of Internet session in order to identify compromised devices. And second, as we are supervisory authority at one time as well, then in case incident requires, then EISA may restrict the usage or the access to the network and information system. So, what kind of challenges can be foreseen currently is definitely incident reporting, and more specifically, pursuant to NIS directive, member states have to ensure that all service providers notify in case of significant incident. So by now we haven't solved this challenge. And we are going to do it in collaboration with service providers. But this baseline should be enacted in legislative act and namely in ruling under this Cybersecurity Act. And problems I can outline is that when NIS directive says that member states should recognize dependencies of other sectors, because this would be one trigger for this obligation to notify, then it has been experienced that service providers are not familiar at all with those cross-sector dependencies. So it's very tricky to assess the impact of the incident. We are talking about notification because this impact grows or changes in a time. So it's kind of tricky challenge. Of course, assessing cross-border impact is very, very difficult as well at the same time. So, but thank you.
Good, thank you. Yes. So let's continue with our experience. Sanita, welcome.
Hello to everyone, and first of all, I would like to thank you for having me here in this panel, and thank organizers to taking this issue to this conference. So, NIS directive is first EU-wide rules on cybersecurity, and when you need to transpose those rules into national law, it leads to a lot of issues and challenges. First of all, I would like to look on the existing situation, what we have here in Latvia, and that's what we do now, and then a little bit about experience to setting operators. So we have a law on the security of information technologies, which already sets some kind of activities for state and or local government authority and for the owner of the critical infrastructure. So they shall perform all activities necessary for the prevention and inform CERT without delays. And then we have a regulation, a cabinet regulation, which sets minimum security requirements and procedures for the ensuring conformity of information and communication technologies systems. For legal persons, that's a little bit different, so they still have a duty to perform activities necessary for the prevention, but reporting is not mandatory, so if it's up to them. And so now our aim is to set legal base for other legal persons who are under NIS directive, who has an obligation to inform CERT and set minimum security requirements. Other thing where we work now is to determine rights and competencies for competent institution. In our case, that could be Digital Security Supervisory Committee and CERT. So, as in other countries, we have issues too. And what I want to highlight here, it's a question about penalties and competencies and tasks for the competent institution and CERT, because on national regulations in the laws, there is already set some kind of tasks for the CERT, and according to NIS directive, those are is for competent institutions. So we need to find the best way how to deal with that. And of course, we have a cybersecurity strategy on place, and I would say it covers all issues mentioned in directive, but as the strategy is in place till 2018, so we will work on reviewing and improving our strategy and set all necessary things which is has to be according to NIS directive. Next, what I would like to tell you about how we worked on identification operators of essential services. As Baiba mentioned, as task to end it, it's next year, but we already started the process, and it helped us to understand all necessary regulations which has to be covered. And we worked closely with responsible governmental institutions, ministries, and with private sector. So governmental institutions were those who identified those operators, so you can see there is an energy sector. There is for electricity. We have identified 3 operators. For gas 2. There is next transport sector and subsectors: air transport 3, rail transport 3, water transport 3, and we added one which is not mentioned in the directives, that is postal services. Why we did that? Because we see that there could be significant disruptive effect, because postal services in our country are provide the services for people, like they make cash transfers, cash transactions, and they are very important for rural area. So where is no banks, and so they are some kind of service providers in the rural area, and road transport too. So next is finance, market, and infrastructure. We have identified 3 operators, and health sector is the biggest one. There is 18, and because it covers like hospitals, specified hospitals, and state emergency medical service, and state authorities, like which provide very important services, like for example, state blood donor center. And drinking water supply and distribution system, we have identified 4, and plus those who are critical water supply systems as a critical infrastructure. And totally we have identified 42 operators. So, and as an example how we get to the result, I want to show you and to tell you how we did that. So, first of all, as we said, we cooperate with institutions and private sectors. There were meetings, so we invited them and explained some kind of like basic for how to identify those operators, and then they went back to work and decided on their way how they will do that, involving private sector or so in this case for water there are 2 institutions who are in charge. For water supply, it's a health inspectorate under the Ministry of Health, and so the main purpose of this institution is to reduce risks for society and consumers' health by realizing state surveillance. So they as a criteria took our cabinet regulation, which set categories of water supply system using different criteria, like number of people who receive service, critical reduction, and that's how they identified 4 operators who provide services for more than 50,000 people, and reduction can be for 30%, not more, and not more than for 3 days. That's and deny of service not more than for 10 minutes. So that they got to this to those companies. Water supply systems that are critical infrastructure which was mentioned in the previous slide. That is not public information, so we just added this information as for knowing. And what relates to water distribution, so there is another institution who is in charge, that is Food and Veterinary Service under the Ministry of Agriculture. So you can, so you can see that how many different institutions and different levels are involved, and they looked through and informed us that systems are not or just partially rely on network and information systems, and so that's why we we have only operators for purification, so in water supply. And wastewater treatment, that's under municipalities, and there is those systems are not only partially rely on a network and information systems, and that effect is not so significant. So that's from my side, from how we do.
Good, thank you.
Thanks.
Edgars, very, very brief on incidents. You have 1 minute. We have to start discussions.
Well, if I want to still continue to work in CERT.LV, I have to obey BIBA for every task. So I will very, very briefly touch incident reporting and security requirements, which is the most thing that CERT.LV is most involved with, and I will try to do it in 1 minute. This is this citation from a directive, and notice that we are trying to gain security requirements that would be suitable for both operators of essential services and digital service providers, although it may be a little cheating in terms of NIS directive scope, but still. And this slide illustrates the differences between the requirements for both operators. As you see, there's some parts that are in caps lock, which are similar, and then are some parts that are different. Criteria for reporting. ENISA did some voluntary reporting, ENISA, which is a European Network and Security Agency, and they were looking on criteria that operators themselves use as to determine what is a significant incident and what is not. And as you see, the top of them are duration of the incident and users affected, as well as the extent of disruption, which applies to digital service providers, which is combination of sort of multiple factors of infrastructure involved and losses and etc. What is our proposal to the Ministry of Defense as for criteria for reporting is the combination of user percentage and user hours. As you see in the red sector, if incident falls into this red sector, then it should be reported, as well as we try to do something with the regional aspect of the incident reporting, which means if incident has affected 1/4 of Latvian territory, then it should be reported, as well as if it touches more than one of member states, then it also should be reported. And for digital service provider, which is somehow differently mentioned there, there's also one more criteria, which is losses connected to the incident. This is the thing that covers covers security requirements. As you see, there's also some similarities and some differences. Mainly digital services, as directive states, should be regulated more loosely and with sort of more light touch. But still we are trying to make at least minimum requirements for them that matches both of them. And then if there is some differences, then we will comment on that additionally. And these are security requirement mappings. We try to take a look at a very high level mapping of security requirements. These are from ISO 27001 grouping of security requirements. As you see, these requirements are almost correlating with existing legal framework. So our idea is not to broke what is already working, just to add something and then to be as careful as possible in terms of minimal security requirements. That's it. Sorry for...
Fantastic. You did very, very well, Edgar. Sorry for pushing you. be so fast, but I think we have a lot really to discuss, so let me recap a little bit. We had insight in the situation in the Netherlands, in Estonia, and in Latvia. We all three countries, we have operational CERTs in place for already many years. We all have institutions that are responsible for this area, that are working on implementing and transposing the directive. These institutions are active members of the cooperation group. CERTs are active members of the CERT network. So up to this point, we are fine. We are fine. The one thing which we have to recognize is that we are probably one of the most advanced countries in Europe. There are many other countries that are not this well positioned. So there is a digital gap in this respect also on where the countries are at the moment. And I think it's not a coincidence that we are sitting in this combination around this table, because we are perhaps, we have dedicated more time and effort to this topic already. Now, we have CERTs, we have ministries working on the issue about the essential service providers. I think we are also quite good, but I would like to ask you very shortly, so how do you think, are there any issues regarding the essential service providers? Martijn.
I think with regard to the essential service providers, there's it's extremely difficult for us anyway, in the Dutch situation, it's extremely difficult to find the providers, to declare the providers of essential services. So for example, we've got a list of companies that we think provide essential services, but it's very difficult or very easy to leave out companies that are in the same essential chain. So should one of them fall out and you have not declared them as essential, what happens then? Also, essential service providers might not want to report incidents to you, so they might have to, but they've also got different obligations of reporting other stuff. So it's really a matter of getting in touch with them and making sure you've got a good relationship with them. And the big issue or the big challenge there is basically that they're, most of them, about 90% of essential services are provided by non-government organizations. They've all got their own things that they think are important, their own agenda, and it's our pain to get them involved. So those are some of the challenges we've faced.
Good. So in Estonia, what are the biggest challenges with essential providers, or all are more or less clear?
Yeah, well, as we have identified those service providers already years ago, as this Emergency Act entered into force already in 2009, so this is no challenge for us. And we are in very good collaboration with them. We have been, and we are now as well. So this is no challenge for us. The only, as I mentioned in my presentation, was regarding incident reporting, because CERT's view of significant incident is not the same as service providers do have. So there is a gap and our views distinguish. So this is one huge challenge for us. Thank you.
Good. So what about Latvia?
Yeah, well, one thing I want to mention very briefly, maybe not going into more details, is operators of essential services, as was already mentioned somewhere, is a part of or a subset or part of a subset of critical infrastructure service providers as well. So we have to work, keeping in mind our situation with critical infrastructure, we have to work closely with the State Security Agency, which is Constitution Protection Bureau, in order to achieve harmonization in that area as well. So this is maybe a specific to Latvia issue, because what I have heard from other nations and states, this is not an unusual case, because sometimes operators of essential services are the same that critical infrastructure, and it is a specific case in Latvia maybe.
Indeed. So with essential service providers, it's not exactly the same as critical infrastructure providers, but it's still something we already know for years. There are some issues, but we know them. What about digital service providers?
Those are interesting because we haven't got the legal task to work for the digital service provider, so that's why we've been able to work together with the Ministry of Economic Affairs to identify the DSPs and to get an organization, get a CERT, establish a CERT basically for those types of organizations. But the NIS directive is challenging to interpret when it comes to which organizations fall into the definition of DSP according to the directive. So we've been doing a couple of studies on that. We think we've gone quite a way, so we're getting there, and we're helping the Ministry of Economic Affairs setting up the CCERT for this type of services.
So in the Netherlands, you have identified that you have digital service providers.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Might be different in other countries because for digital service providers there are thresholds set in the directive, and for small countries like Latvia and Estonia it can turn out that we don't have any digital service providers. How is it, Elsa?
Yeah, that's true, Baiba. Actually, I cannot guarantee that we don't have any of them, but at least we have very few of them. So it's currently it's not priority for us to identify them. Plus, NIS directive says clearly that member states should have maximum harmonization regarding digital service providers and requirements for them. So it's not a very huge challenge for us, yet it has to be solved. And one option how identify them is to do it in collaboration with the e-commercial union with regard to online marketplaces, for instance. And we can gather some data from tax authority as well to determine these thresholds.
Thank you. Sanita, how does it look in Latvia with digital service providers?
For small countries, it's different as in bigger countries, because we need to take into account this NIS directive, where it says that for digital service providers, norms not apply to micro and small enterprises. So it means like companies were work 249 persons. It will not be. So that's where it's kind of, for small countries, it's not issue, I would say.
Good. Now I would like to give a chance to you to ask some burning questions. Otherwise I will just continue what I have prepared, but I believe that you might have something pressing that you would like to bring up. Maybe you want to steer our discussion. Should it go about incidents and thresholds, or should it go towards penalties, or maybe towards cross-border incidents? Any preferences?
Actually, looking from the kind of other side of the story, what benefits it will bring for those who will be those providers for those services?
And if I may add that the question comes from financial service part, so maybe with that background you can give some insight. Will there be any changes or benefits? How do you think?
In our situation, we've asked ourselves the same question, because it's in the directive, so we need to do something with it, but why? And we believe that the way we're approaching this is that we're asking organizations that we need to do work for to ask for help proactively before they need to report. So that would provide them help should they not be able to resolve the problem themselves. And even more importantly, if all sectors report their incidents to us, we can provide cross-sector information. So anything that hits the financial sector might also hit the energy sector, for example. Yeah, exactly, or medical sector. And that is why we're working cross-sector already, and this is going to be reinforced or enforced with the NIS directive implementation, making sure that sectors get relevant information cross-sector to get a wider view of the threat coming towards them. That's the Dutch situation anyway.
Any other comments, Edgars?
Well, pretty much what was already said. Well, if in case of incident reporting, there's the things like if you need some help, if you need to protect others, or if there's something to be learned or something to be researched in case of incident. So we have done some incentives like responsible internet service provider, which is not in the context of NIS directive, but still we might come up with something like that. But you know, there's nothing much else to to make of that. You know, it's like protect yourself or protect others, and there's nothing else to be said about that.
Good. Any other question at the moment? Okay, Oskar.
About those essential services, nowadays everything is kind of outsourcing or cloud services. It might be the case that some of the industries are very heavily relying on those, and basically you might not identify those to be an essential services, but still, if something happens, all the industry is down. What about that aspect?
Excellent question. We discussed it yesterday among ourselves. That we can identify as many dependencies as we want on each other, but let's be honest, we all depend on Microsoft, we all depend on Apple and on a couple of other big vendors, and they are mostly US based. So in the EU, even if we have all the directive in place and everyone is identified and responding, etc., then the cross-border dependencies are really huge. And speaking about cloud, if the Azure cloud goes down, it will be a very tough moment. But can you say something more about these dependencies and clouds?
There is something we can do as European organizations, and we've had this discussion with our constituents last week, Friday, when we discussed this exact same topic. And that is that for all the services, the service providers, that you use nationally, organizations are going to, or at least we identified this to be the case in Holland, organizations will need to make arrangements with their service providers so that as soon as they see anything go down, they need to report it through a contract or anything to the client of that service. So for example, our constituency has a managed security service with a service provider. As soon as he sees anything go down or a bit of their infrastructure goes down, they need to report to us without delay. The delay starts as soon as they know, so they'll need to know as soon as possible from their provider. So this will need to find its way into contracts with these service providers.
Yeah, just to add, of course we cannot solve everything by implementing a NIS directive, but this cross-dependencies issue, it's good that we have a discussion on that, and maybe in the process of implementing NIS directive, all the players should take a hard look on their infrastructure and on their independencies, and then maybe come up with some solutions. Not of course 100% secure, but still it's better than nothing. So that's also.
Thank you. Any other question? Oskar or anyone else? Yes, Arnis there.
One question a little bit from the other side, actually, that the same issues regarding, you mentioned the cloud services. The question actually is connected to the public sector usage of clouds services. Is there any planned discussions or thinking about any recommendation from NS side or central regulations or regarding the let's say the risks and threats and the recommendations of usage of cloud for the public and critical infrastructure?
So, well, cloud service providers are part of the digital service providers, right? So yes. They are one of the NIS subjects.
So regarding minimal service requirements, security requirements, you have to pretty much, in case of Latvia, deal with what is mentioned already for state and local municipalities, institutions regarding clouds and regarding outsourcing. Perhaps in process of implementing NIS directive, we will probably come up with some kind of amendments and some kind of additions to that, but I would not expect much in the first year or so. So pretty much you have to be still in charge of your own security and make your own decisions very carefully where you put your infrastructure. So that's my recommendation.
More or less the same goes for the Dutch situation. We've published a fact sheet on how to go about securing your information that you use and the service that you use in the cloud. Taking care of stuff such as personal information, with whom do you share it? Do you put it across the border somewhere in the US? Or do you make sure that you have a risk assessment that takes care of all the, it's a very basic document, but that really tells the owner of the information, make sure that you make a conscious decision that if it's okay to have some of your services in the US, make sure that it's with a plan behind it, and you've had a good look at the risks involved.
Right. Yes.
I can just add there is NIS cooperation working group where people from EU countries come and discuss where each country are and where issues are, and we have discussed this about cross-border dependencies, but about cloud, so there is so far no discussions, but definitely this can come up in near future.
And let's face, we cannot do everything at the same time, one by one. The clouds will come. Right. Let me now steer a little bit discussion towards reporting incidents. We all are from CERT team, so incidents is our daily bread and butter. We are used to receive incident reports. We are used to deal with incident reports. And that part of identified operators that are already part of our constituency, either they are critical infrastructure or for some other means, they should be used to report incidents as well. And we usually exchange information about all sorts of events and incidents, and they are not necessarily in the threshold of the directive. So the question is, do you think that something will change, that we will really receive more incident reports than now? How does it look? Go ahead.
Thank you. I think initially we will receive a bit more incident reports because people need to get used to the new law saying that you need to report your incidents. What we try to communicate with every time that we use, that we are in contact with our constituency is, please report quickly. It doesn't need to meet the threshold. As soon as you report quickly, we can help you very quickly. And only as soon as you say this meets a particular threshold, do we set a check. Yes, this was reported under the Mandatory Reporting Act, but it doesn't really change our approach to handling incidents. So it's, we think of it as the carrot. So we tell them there's a benefit in it for them to report, and only if it meets a particular threshold, we're in touch already, and then we can take it from there.
Good. Others? Yeah.
Well, in terms of CERT.LV, we're looking after NIS implementation of potentially 10% decrease of our constituency, more or less, checking the numbers. So probably some kind of incident reporting flow will go up. But there's a case of building trust, and it can be built only slowly and gradually, and it could be, of course, lost immediately. But I think CERT.LV has proved in dealing with constituents that we can handle incident reports, and we can handle different incident reports in terms of confidential information of personal data, etc., etc. And we will try to work as before on incidents. So.
would you like to add about Estonia, or you're not the right person to ask about incidents?
Well, actually, I might say I'm not the right person to comment that issue, but I can't see any reason why the reporting should increase. So voluntary reporting remains still. So legally, it's just a question about determining the threshold, when exactly this service provider has to report, when it's mandatory to report. That's the only question.
Yeah, Martijn?
I agree that it shouldn't definitely not increase. There might be a situation of uncertainty that they might think, do we need to report yes or no? That might be the first uptick, probably. One of the things we also do to keep the trust, as Varys said, trust is essential. And that's why we tell our constituency about our process. So as soon as you pick up the phone, this is what happens within our organization. And that's when we also tell them that the process hasn't changed, that only if it's mandatory or if it falls in the Mandatory Reporting Act, we'll make sure that it's written down in a different way to make sure that any research later on, they'll be able to say, yes, we've done the non-delayed mentioning of it. But being open really helps in keeping the trust with our constituency.
Yes, I think that trust is really important element, and it cannot be mandated. Also, although the directive tries to do it, but it cannot be. Trust can be just built, and it takes time, and it will not happen overnight. And in case of our CSER teams, we've been working for that already for 5-10 years, and that's why things are looking quite well, I would say. So once again, chance for you to ask something about incident reporting, about thresholds, or anything else. Where would you like to see our discussion going?
Yeah, so we always have a question, what do you mean with significant? And maybe you can comment, and what would be the approach or the best way to report, not to go very deep in details, to stay on a level that is easy, understandable on all sides, and not to receive back some penalties later because you did something wrong. Because also those, a lot of companies, they started, build the incident registers, systems, and at the beginning, when they implement tools, they have problems of receiving a lot of information, and then they sort out false positives, and then they try to understand, is this really incident, yes or no? And then also with GDPR, next sessions, but also I think related to this one, it's very important to say where is the border, because they have somehow at home decide this is the point where we report and this is the point where we solve internally. And that's why that's good that this CERT is investing in trusted relationships. Yeah, you just ask friend, help me to understand, is this important, yes or no? Because our security team is starting to work with the new tools, and they cannot understand or sort out those are important or not. Because for big incidents, sometimes also small indications could be very crucial later. And if you combine, let's say, targeted attack to bank sector, also it could be not only one bank, but many banks targeted through the group of hackers, and then it's important. So, and you as CERT you can sort out, is this really?
Sure, sure. And I would start answering by saying that we have IT security law in place already for 6 years, and we received this question for 6 years or 7 years already. What is important incident? When do we have to report? And then we are trying to say that, well, you have this sort of level of pain, which you have every day, all the scanning, and all that is within that level. About that we probably don't want to hear, but if there is anything that spikes out of the normal level of pain, but that's how it's been so far without the formal EU requirements. So can you comment further on this topic?
I think the stuff that needs to be reported under the EU requirement is stuff that might potentially bring your country to a halt. So if people can no longer get money from the wall, or can no longer use the internet for an X number of hours, that's when things start to go wrong. And in my experience, incidents grow. So they start with something nagging, a nagging pain, and you get more and more information about the incident. You see more, and all of a sudden you think, this is getting out of hand. And that would be the time, or when you think, it could be the moment when you start to think, let me call my CERT. So they might have information from me about this particular incident that others have seen already, or they might have a fresh insight. And it could also be a friendly call saying, listen, this is going on, I'm not sure where it's going, we're on top of it right now, but it might become worse, and we might need to be able to ask the rest of your network to help us out. So those are two examples of where our constituency can very easily call. Though it remains difficult. What is the exact threshold, and when does it become, you know, there should be a nagging feeling saying this might be something I'd like to report.
Well, yes, our head of technical division likes to say there's no such thing as a small incident. But just the 2 points adding on what was already said, there will be, because directive requires, there will be formal thresholds for a significant incident, and it was touched a bit in our presentations already. But nevertheless, we are exercising an idea of a two-stage reporting process, which means you report when something is wrong, you have a feeling, you maybe do not know exactly a threshold, or you're not sure what's going on, you just, you know, ping CERT to say, we know something is going on, we don't know exactly what, or whatever, in line of your own incident processing process. And then after that, you can, when hopefully incident is solved already, and it is done, and it is analyzed, you can submit a bit larger report. It's only idea now, but we'll see how it goes out, so thank you.
I would have one comment. I think in regard of notification, the more is better, always. I would say so. But what is minor, what is significant? One option is to rely on continuity of vital service or continuity requirements, to have at least some kind of baseline.
I definitely agree that from CSERT point of view, the more is the better, because we can see the whole picture, we can see if it's perhaps related to some other incidents, etc., etc. And I agree with Edgars that from the directive and formal point of view, we'll have these thresholds, but we'll see how it works in real life. Will people really look at the thresholds and report only when they are met, or can we reach the state when people contact us in case of something which they think can be important, and then we see together if it's really incident in the NIS scope. Yes?
Just to make clear, NIS directive doesn't permit report an incident which doesn't mean the threshold, just to make sure.
Does not permit?
Sorry, it's not, you can report an incident which is below threshold as well. So.
Yes, it's not forbidden. Not forbidden. Good. Any other question at the moment? Okay.
You mentioned that trust is very important when you receive the information also from the operators. What is your approach on handling the information that you receive to keep that trust?
Edgars?
Well, we have procedures in place, which has been not only, you don't have to trust our word on it, it has been certified as well from outside with tools we currently have, which is our CERT community has a trusted network certification process, and we have done that. And the outside, let's say, auditors have looked on our processes and had analyzed them. That's one formal approach. Other approach is we can still afford to be very personal with our constituency. Which means we can call them, we can call each responsible person and deal with incidents. So we offer, of course, encryption in reporting of incidents, as well as a technical protection of information and stuff like that. So kind of two-part answer to that, if it makes sense.
And also what really helps is being transparent and sharing. So, like I said just now, being open about your process, you give us a call, this is what happens, reach out to your constituency and to other people and invite them into the office and show how you go about handling an incident. That's what really is important.
Oscar's got another question.
One of the biggest hurdles actually in financial industry in this kind of incident information sharing is this personal data protection. Don't you see any hurdles in this as if law states that you should be sharing incidents with such a threshold, then sharing incidents below this threshold might be unlawful sharing of personal data?
Yes, this almost brings us into the next session, which is about GDPR. And I think if we wouldn't have lunch, we could smoothly continue our discussion, maybe adding a couple more people and swimming from the NIS to GDPR. To start the answering in the GDPR directive, and again, I'm not expert by any means, but there is an article or point 49, which says that for security reasons, you can share information. And that's one solid point where, at least as a CERT, we will base a lot of our information exchange, and I believe that other institutions are also, for the security reasons, it is really a good standing point, but maybe you can comment in more details.
Yeah, just not maybe to add any details, because we, of course, invite you to the next session of GDPR to listen to that. But one thing that NIS directive also states that there will be cases when the information about incident will be shared publicly as well. And that point is needed to be looked at and analyzed, and we are also currently trying to understand GDPR requirements and what they are meaning to us as an organization and in terms of cooperation with our constituency as well. So it's the best answer I can give right now.
Any other comment?
Yeah, I think part of your question was, is it unlawful to report any incidents that do not meet the threshold? And that is no, because we do, in our regular task, anyone can give us any call and we'll try to help our constituency with anything relating to security incidents. Only particular incidents need to be reported, so they have to be reported, and there's a regulator on the side that helps us, is going to help us from the 10th of May next year with doing so, or at least they're going to be regulating this stuff for us. About the personal information, the type of information we share with our constituency, we're allowed to, in our Dutch Act that we currently have, it says that we're allowed to share any personal information with our constituency, being central government and vital infrastructure. We're allowed to. We are not required to. So as soon as we think that with the right permission from the owner of the information, this would help someone else in resolving their problem as well, then we're allowed to share this personal information with them. Loads of incidents can be resolved without sharing personal information, and by simply sharing information on, for example, the technical aspect. So the type of malware, what you need to look out for, and that sort of stuff. So personal information is only a bit of the incident resolution process.
Sanita?
Yeah, I just want to add about existing situation here in Latvia that our law already said that CERT has a right to receive and process personal data. So this is already in place, and that there is, of course, restrictions on to whom they can pass that information. So that's where we will look to on amending when we are now working on the drafting the amendments for this law.
Just to finish this, I think that, as Martijn already mentioned, the incident information not necessarily contains all the personal data. Sometimes it's indicators of compromise that can be used and that are more crucial. But of course, it's a lot of complicated things attached to that. But going back to the GDPR, what do you think? How is it affecting the NIS? Is it good for NIS or is it bad for NIS? Any thoughts on that? Will it help us to get better sight about incidents, or will it prevent people from sharing because they are afraid of GDPR regulation?
Maybe I can say that this definitely will affect that information, what we will collect, and for how long that information will be in place, so how long we will keep it. That definitely will affect, and it's already we are working on that.
It will also affect the way that we work, in the sense that both our constituency and ourselves will need to get in control of our personal data that we process. Which means the better you are in control of your personal information, the more information you have about your systems, the more you will recognize incidents in your organization. So though it's going to be a bit of a wait to actually comply with GDPR, or it's going to be a wait to comply with GDPR, it's also going to give you the insight that you need to be better aware of security incidents. So in a way, it's going to help us as well.
So it's not just bad, it's also good for us. Right. Any questions from your side? We still have almost 20 minutes, so a couple of more topics that we can discuss. But meanwhile, I'll ask about the topic which we didn't touch much, is about the penalties. So what do you think, what should be done in that respect? In my personal opinion, as a CERT, we are trying to be as far from that as possible, because it's very, very hard to be at the same time a friend who is helping and at the same time authority who is issuing a penalty. So, and our position is really to be as far as possible, let somebody else to do it. In regard to the NIS directive, we'll have to find this somebody else to do it, and we'll have to work together on this regard. So what can you say about this topic?
Maybe I will continue about our situation. As you mentioned, this is really quite a big issue, because for us it's like, first of all, it's I think main issue is to find the balance between these carrots and sticks, because if you set penalties, so it's a question for operators will and possibilities as they will try to avoid to inform. But anyway, in our situation, main question is who will apply, because we have a competent institution who will be in place. So, but that is a collegial body. So, and CERT, because of your mission, because of your place in governmental institution system, where you are out of that, so not a possibility. Ministry, it's a policy maker, so not the one who can. So what we thought about administrative acts and compulsory execution of those. So that's one of the possible solutions for us.
So the ministry could issue administrative act?
No, most probably that will be competent institutions, so they will issue.
Okay, so the competent institution composed of several institutions will be the one issuing administrative act, which will operators will have to comply with.
Of course, we need to set that in the law.
Sure, but that's the vision. So what do you plan in Estonia?
We are competent authority and supervisory authority, as I mentioned earlier, at the same time. And we have had that role already a couple of years, from 2011. Yet we haven't punished entities, because keeping the trust and keeping transparent relationship is crucial for us. So, talking about NIS and this Cybersecurity Act draft, these violations may apply only in case of requirements of security measures are not followed, and maximum amount might be 200 fine units and 20,000 euros. But once again, that's only an option. But I do hope that we don't have to apply that kind of violation system. Plus, we haven't drafted that we have violation if a person doesn't notify of incident. We try to avoid that.
Stein?
Yes, Kaur?
Oh. Just a moment. One more comment from the Netherlands, and then we'll get to your question.
Yeah, very quickly. In Holland, we've taken the same approach as Latvia in that we separate the helping organization from the regulator, or from the person that carries the stick. So the competent authority in Holland is going to be the sectoral regulator for the sector, which means that we'll be in close contact with these people, but we won't have anything to do with the regulator. In fact, there's going to be basically a divide between the information that we have in order to maintain the trust with our constituency and the person actually giving the fines. So we won't give any information to the regulator. We'll only tell our constituent, please keep in mind that besides reporting this to us, you'll also need to report this to your regulator.
And you will have a regulator for each sector responsible for this?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Good. Kaur.
Hello, I'm Kaur from Estonia, Information System Agency. I have a comment that I am not asking a response, and then a question. The comment is that maybe we should be thinking about NIS++, by which the agencies could cross-penalize other countries, so that Latvian CERT could assign penalties to Estonian companies not doing the job, and Estonians could gather penalties, let's say, from France. Just an idea. But the actual question, I do very much believe that compliance should be made easy for the bodies who are falling under compliance. And one of the possible ways how a state can actually help is by providing tools, not just guidance and legislation, but also providing tools, platforms. For example, GDPR is mostly a process-driven regulation. You will actually offer a platform by which you can manage your databases, whatnot, centrally, if somebody wants. Do you think that it is possible within NIS as well to provide actual or factual tools that companies can use to drive the process, to report, to gather information, to share this? What are the technical options how a state can help?
Well, I think that the technical part of incident sharing is on the table already for 20 years, and we are still discussing about the format. Should we use sticks or taxi or something else? So what do you think? Is there anything we can do in regard to NIS to help people about incident reporting or other parts?
Well, we're in terms of incident reporting, we are trying to do some minor steps and cooperate individually with some constituents in terms of automatic exchange of information about incidents. That's pretty much our one tool that we can offer on face-to-face basis, basically, on case-by-case basis. In terms of processes and tools, I'm sure that there will, well, you see in GDPR there's a lot of interest from commercial sector to offer consultancies and stuff like that to implement GDPR, how to do that. I haven't seen that in terms of NIS directive yet, but you know, maybe somewhere along the line somebody will come up with something. And from our part, we'll probably try to continue awareness and education of constituents in pretty much the same way that we have done already, and try to help as we can.
Martijn?
I think, well, the same goes for Holland, where we try to help with general knowledge about how you need to have your processes in place. So the tools are basically pieces of text and a piece of paper that help organizations organize themselves and make sure that they have the processes in place. As to technical tools, that's quite difficult because we're not responsible for their infrastructures. Being a government, we need to stay out of their infrastructures, which we recognize, and that is good. What we can do is facilitate easy reporting. So we have various possibilities to get information to us in a secure manner. So various crypto options, etc. And being open for comments. For example, if one particular sector would like to report in a particular way, we'll go and discuss with them what is easiest for them and how we can. So that's basically, as far as tools, technical tools are concerned, what we can do.
Thank you. Questions? While you are thinking, I would like to ask for us as CERTs, what will change with the NIS? Will there be anything better, or will we just have more work to do?
Yes, there will be more work, which is not a bad thing. I think that what will improve is that we are now required to cooperate with the 27 other member states on various levels. So the cooperation group does excellent work, the CISA network does excellent work, and in that way we know where to find each other, and we get to more or less formalize information sharing, which is something that has been a challenge over the last couple of years. Also, what I think is what really helps is that there are stronger certs and not so strong certs, more mature certs and not so mature certs in Europe, and I think NIS will help them improve. So all the tools that we're developing in the working groups, INISA is doing excellent work in this respect as well. So that really increases the maturity of CCerts, which basically increases the response capability of us all.
Yes, and in regard to maturity, there is also a special effort in the group to explain the maturity levels and to push all the teams towards higher levels. Those who are now in the listed level, we want them to get to the accreditation level and then further to certifiable level. It's not necessarily to get through this formal certification, because that cannot be required from the EU side, but from the point of view of maturity, I think it's really very important. Edgars?
Yeah, well, certainly there will be both more work and some improvements as well. So what I wanted to mention that there is a tool that is supposed to help cooperation of certs, which is currently in development process, and we will see how it goes. And it's supposed to be a platform. Well,
closer
sorry,
to you.
And it's supposed to be a platform for cooperation between CERTs, and it will. I think it will influence CERTs in terms of harmonization of their usage of tools. That might help. Maturity level as well, of course, if the field is more level, then it's easier to do information exchange and cooperation. Well, something else, well, of course, changes in legal acts maybe will force or help our constituents to oversee their own processes and maybe to implement something new or to improve something. That has to be looked at as well.
Ladies, do you want to comment, or not so much insight in the CSERT world? One thought that I just got is that if we manage to harmonize tools that we are using as a CSERT, that would contribute hugely also to the maturity of those tools. Because as long as we each use different set and we all put our own effort in keeping up those tools, it is one thing. But if we manage to get more harmonization, that would, I think, really make a huge difference. So once again, the chance for you to ask something. Not yet. Good. I have another question. The NIS is here. We know it. It's been around for a year. But what are those bits that shouldn't be in the NIS? What are those that are maybe wrong or that are not so well thought of? There must be something. Go ahead. Elsa.
Thank you for intriguing question. Digital service providers. Answer from my side. Anything from your point of view?
No, I think there might be one aspect maybe missing, but as to looking at our situation, we're quite happy with the aspects. Obviously, there's a lot more work, and one DSPs, that being in there caused a lot more work. But that also forces us to cooperate a bit more with other organizations, which is good. So I'm quite content with the contents at the moment. There will be differences, there will be changes, obviously, in the long run. But something that we're currently looking into certification, for example, of service providers, as we see throughout Europe in various countries. And that's something that might be interesting to see in the context of NIS.
Anything else?
Okay, well, there might be something with the distinctions between digital service provider and operators of essential services, which goes a bit what was already said. I think maybe if the smaller steps would be easier if this distinction was not in place, but we got what we got and we have to work with that. So good luck to us all.
That's for sure. So last chance. A question about the NIS directive implementation. So just to recap, we have time until next year, May, to transpose it into our national legislation. Meanwhile, we have to identify operators, we have to set thresholds for the incident reporting, we have to somehow manage the trust with all these operators so that they actually report incidents to us. We have to have all the ecosystem in place so that incidents are reported in a secure way, and we know what to do with that, and I'm quite confident that our teams will deal with that in a very good manner. Still, I would like to give each of you one last chance for one sentence what we should focus on in the next year apart from these obvious things. What do you think is something we either have to start thinking or which is really important? One bit. Who would like to start?
Okay. Well, I think that we will try, in cooperation with Ministry of Defense, to keep in mind the to say, the spirit of NIS, which is to improve security overall, and not to maybe follow the letter of directive, but try to implement the spirit of it. So that's my wish to everybody.
Thank you.
Actually, for next year, as we all have heard about this European Commission cybersecurity package, so it looks like there will be some kind of Commission's implementing regulation on further specification for digital service providers. So that will rise as additional, I think, work for us, because there will be regulations already, most probably will be regulations in the place, and so that will be further work on NIS directive implementation.
Thank you. Elsa, any last words? Biggest concerns or something else?
Yeah, well, digital service providers, once again, identifying them in Estonia to set up universal and reasonable thresholds for incident reporting, mandatory. And that would be it.
I'm sure it will be enough work. Martijn, what would you add at the end?
For us, the focus is going to be on getting closer to our constituency and our networks, making sure that the thresholds for getting in touch with each other will disappear to the max, making sure that organizations will find us and we will be able to help other organizations become more mature within the EU CSAT network, for example. So closer contact.
Excellent. And with this, I would like to thank all of you for participation, for listening. We have interesting process ahead of us. I'm sure there will be a lot of work to do, and we'll have more discussion on this in the future, I'm sure. Thank you.